Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and it's finally here! It's, well, early patch day, but the patch notes have been released. As soon as, by the time you're seeing this video go up, I will probably already be live, showing off the patch, but I did want to make a video going over the patch notes, just to talk through everything, because obviously not everything is going to be shown off in the actual video, or live stream I should say, because a lot of these things are a little more minor, or what have you. So, without further ado, let's just fly into it. So we have good old William here with telling us about patch 6.1. So let's see what we've got going on. Of course, we got some new units. So we got the Nangao Grenadiers, which are a new unit for Grand Cathay that have the ability to use stun bombs to heavily disorient enemy infantry, as well as having regular grenades to deal good damage to packed infantry units. They make for a really, really nice disruption unit and are a solid melee ranged-ish hybrid for Grand Cathay, which is excellent. We also have the Noblar Flingers, which I'm particularly excited about because I just really like ogres. And the Noblar Flingers are going to be a pretty critical asset, I think, to the Ogre Kingdoms. They're going to be adding, I think, a significant amount of strength as far as giving the ogres an actually decent, cheap, ranged option. As cool as Noblar Trappers are, they're a little more on the pricey side for, you know, kind of basic ranged infantry, and they also don't have very long range. But these guys actually have pretty decent range, which is fantastic. Also, because they are a free unit, they're also going to be showing up in garrisons and such, which is always great. Alright, we've got Tzeentch's changes for the Kairos Fate Weaver's Fragments of Sorcery. So we've talked a lot about this in the prior thing. They've basically kind of revealed all the main stuff, which is that you have 6 spell slots just like all other wizards, but uniquely you have the ability to pick which 6 spells you're going to take. So each slot corresponds with a particular slot on the other Winds of Magic. So you have a pretty extreme amount of customization. It's not total customization, so you're not able to pick like any spell you want for the first slot. It has to be a first slot spell from one of the 9 lores of magic you have access to, same for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. But it's still a pretty incredible amount of customization and allows you to change your spells very, very frequently, which is nice. Every 5 levels you unlock another 2 slots. So at level 1 you start with 2 slots, and then at level 5 you get this slot, and then, you get this slot, and then level 10 you get this slot, level 15 you get this slot, and level 20 you get this slot. Or I think it goes like this, actually. I think it goes from left to right. But, so you'll unlock them all fairly quickly, and then you have various buffs, depending on which heads you invest skill points into, which he has a pretty short personal tree for his magic casting that gets very, very powerful. So his left head is all about buffing Life, Metal, Light, and Heavens, and his right head is about buffing Death, Beast, Shadow, and Fire. And it's pretty good. It's pretty spooky. And the nice thing is that you could switch it. There's no cooldown period, so you could switch it between battles whenever you want. And it allows for some pretty fascinating customization, which is great. Then we see that there's a lot of building and unit availability reworking to Tzeentch. So, for instance, the Secret Society chain has been moved from tier 3, T4 to tier 2, tier 3. So, basically, it used to be that if you wanted a cultist hero, you could only get them at tier 3. Then you got increased capacity at tier 4. And then I believe you get access to the Lord of Change from this one at tier 5. So basically what they've done is they've bumped it down from the 2 starting tiers are now tier 2, which gives you access to cultist heroes. And then tier 3, you get increased capacity for cultist heroes. So if you want more cultists, you're able to now do that in minor settlements, but this just gives you easier access to it in major settlements, which I think is a good change. We also see that Chaos Sorcerers have been bumped down from tier 4 to tier 3 in the Mortal Servant chain. And the capacity increase has been moved from tier 5 to tier 4. I think this is reasonably fine, especially because Tzeentch is supposed to be the magic faction. They should get their sorcerers faster than the other factions. So, that being said, I don't know. I think Zing, or I think Nurgle and Slash have Chaos Sorcerers at tier 4, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I actually would have to go look. But I do think overall this is a good change. They made a little bit of a unique separation between the capital chain buildings. So when you take over a major settlement, you can either build it as a Chaos Rift or a Keep. The Keep is the more mortal-leaning one and is more about defenses and cheaper garrison structures, whereas the Demon Portal or the Rift Chain is more about military building support and making your demons nasty. The nice thing, though, is that the Rift Chain now allows you to hire Blue Horrors and Chaos Fairies at tier 1, so you just get access to those without needing to build the Demon Horror building, which is actually really, really nice, especially early on in the campaign. Especially as the Standard and Spear Marauders you can get from the Minor Settlement building, which is always more mortal-leaning. We then see that Marauder Horsemen have dropped down from tier 3 to tier 2. Chaos Warriors with Halberds are now tier 3 instead of tier 4, and then Chosen and Chosen with Halberds, instead of being tier 5, are now tier 4. So this seems to be something we're seeing pretty standard across just Chaos in general, is Chosen and Chaos Warriors are being made a little more easy to get access to, instead of being like absolute pinnacle tier, which I think is fine. We do see that the Chaos Spawn are no longer in the Mortal Servant tree. They've popped over to the Forges of Change, so there's a little less bloat in the Mortal Servants tree. And then the economy structures have been buffed a little bit, so you get a little more money, which is nice. And also, all buildings give you additional income when the winds of magic are tempestuous, so you're much more heavily incentivized with Tzeentch to try and have as much magic as you can. Then we have revamped skill trees for the Herald of Tzeentch, the Exalted Lord of Change, and Kairos Fateweaver. So the Exalted Lord of Change and the Herald of Tzeentch got way more powerful, basically split skills. So you have like options to choose from when you reach certain levels, and you get like one of the 3. And you can do that. You get to do that twice, which lets you customize your lords a bit more. Kairos Fateweaver's Lord trait has been heavily buffed. We'll talk about that during like the actual kind of live stream and stuff, but the big thing that he has now is, I want to say he has like something like a 10% cooldown reduction for spellcasting. Also, he's way better at buffing barriers, which I can't remember. I want to say that's his Lord trait specifically, not his faction trait. But though I might be wrong on that, it might actually be his faction trait, but it's something like, not only do his barriers take less time to start recharging, but they also recharge faster, so just way better. And then also a big one that I know is faction wide is that he has a significant increase to how fast he builds construction. So when making new buildings or upgrading buildings, he does it much faster, because he's Kairos Fateweaver and he can see the future, and that makes civil matters much simpler to deal with, apparently, which is very funny. This, though, is one of my favorite changes in the entire update, which is the starting cults, because this is super cool, because I love whenever they make reference to lore stuff. So now Kairos starts with 2 cults to basically give you a more diverse starting situation. One is that you start with a Tzeentch cult in the grounds of Montfort, which is a callback to the Year of Woe, which the Year of Woe is a very cool storyline that basically follows Kairos Fateweaver manifesting in Bretonnia, and he rampages around Bretonnia for a year, going after artifacts of the original, I want to say it's the original 12 companions of Gilles Le Breton, including Gilles himself. And Kairos' goal is basically to gather all of these artifacts and then use them to unleash some horrifying ritual that will change Bretonnia forever in like the worst possible way. However, for those that are aware of the story, Kairos is nearly ultimately successful. He gets most of the artifacts, all but one, and the last artifact he needs ends up being within the city of Musion, the cursed city, or the damn city, however you look at it. But when Kairos goes to Mousillon, this attracts the attention of Nurgle, because Nurgle loves Mousillon, because it's a place, it's a breeding ground for all kinds of horrible plagues and disease, and is a place where Nurgle holds a lot of sway. So Nurgle, surprisingly, comes to Bretonia's aid and actually unleashes a great demonic legion led by Kugoth Plaguefather, and we get this big epic battle between Kugoth and Kairos, where Kugoth ends up killing Kairos Fateweaver. And even though Kugoth himself is then slain by a bunch of Bretonian knights that show up, who initially arrive to deal with Kairos, but, you know, just see two demons and are like, okay, and just attack both of them. Kugoth was successful in his mission. And with the defeat of Kairos Fateweaver, Kairos dissipates back into the ether, and all of the artifacts that he had stolen basically fall onto the ground where he had been. So Bretonia is saved by an unexpected ally. So having this, I think, is really, really cool. I would love to see this also reflected with Kugoth Plaguefather. I feel like Kugoth should start with a cult in Mousillon as well. I think that would be really, really fun. But for right now, I think this is great, especially because if you want, you can either use this as a ritual site to just harvest materials, because Tzeentch has one of the better cult systems, or you can, of course, use the demon summoning to just summon Kairos Fateweaver into Bretonia if you want to play an old world campaign instead of dealing with Oxiodal down in the Southern Chaos Waste. And then they also added another cult in the Crystal Spires, which is at the very tippy top of the Northern Chaos Waste, and also is where there is a landmark building that you can start immediately with Tzeentch. So if you want, you can also do a ritual to summon Kairos north. So basically, he kind of has two optional start locations that you can jump to, I think, on turn 3, if you do the ritual immediately on turn 1, which is great. It just adds a lot of different playability to his campaign and allows him to have a different experience if you want, and you really like playing him. Kislev. Oh my god, there's so much going on with Kislev. So, big thing, Boris Ursus is now just unlocked. He is no longer a hidden secret character for people that are picking up the game for the first time and have not played a Kislev campaign. Now it is simply, as long as you own Total War Warhammer 3, you immediately get access to Boris. Just immediately. You don't have to earn him anymore. Which I think is fine. It was a fun, cute little idea originally, but now, especially when, you know, there was only so many playable factions in the game. You know, there was only eight playable characters. You know, having Boris kind of as the secret ninth character was cute, but now that we have so many, forcing players to go do a Realms of Chaos campaign with Kostaltin or Katerin to get access to Boris is a little silly. So it's good that they've just unlocked him. The supporter race, of course, is gone. We get the new feature, which is now fully fleshed out, which is the Court and Orthodoxy, which allows you to court favor with either the Great Orthodoxy or the Ice Court in exchange for various buffs, which are very, very powerful. And this is a universal Kislev thing, so you have access to it with Mother Ostankya, Boris Ursus, as well as Katerin Kostaltin, and which I think is fine. Like, you know, it revolves around, you know, those particular factions using what influence they have to try and kind of manipulate things, which is pretty interesting. And when you play as the faction, whenever you get 100 supporter points, essentially, you will gain one of these big points. So the bear symbol for the Orthodoxy, or the ice snowflake symbol for the Ice Court, and it adds a point. And then when you have enough points, you are able to buy various buffs, and you also go up a tier, or like a level. Now, the trick is that if you get too heavily into one side or the other, it can start to cause problems. So, like, if you go really heavily into the Ice Court, and you end up being like tier 6 at the Ice Court and tier 1 with the Orthodoxy, that can cause problems for you. So you do need to be careful and maintain your balance. Devotion, we talked, I'm going to kind of just go over these really fast, because these are not that different from everything we've seen from the prior update. But here we see for devotion that, like they were able to tell us, it replaces public order, but now it's actually like a much more useful, exciting system, because you genuinely get some really fascinating buffs. By having good public order, you can unleash invocations that can either buff your army or can buff your province, which is really, really cool. This is really unique. I played around a little bit with it prior to going into the live stream I'll be doing today, and it is very interesting because it makes you care so much more about leaning into public order heavy characters, or what used to be public order, or control rather. Now it's of course devotion, and especially if you're playing on like legendary or very hard campaign difficulty, having a significant amount of investment into buffing devotion is a requirement if you want to use this mechanic, because of course on high difficulties you take a really significant penalty to your devotion, because it's the same as control. So it's like a -10 or something crazy like that. So you are going to want to have a lot of characters, and you're going to want to invest very heavily into your adamins, and you're also going to want to look for techs and agents and all sorts of things that you can find to try and get your devotion or control as good as possible. One thing that I've actually been noticing that amused me a bit is I have been deeply wishing that there was a Kislev hero that improved devotion, because the Ice Witch does income, or the Ice Main does income, the Patriarch does corruption, and I think the Hag Witch does growth. So they don't actually have a dedicated hero whose main gimmick is just to improve your devotion by a lot. Some of the legendary heroes do that, like I know the Golden Knight does that. But man, it makes me really hope we get like a good dedicated melee hero, you know, kind of the equivalent of the Boyar, but like the hero version that's just a fighter, because man, I would really like to just have a hero that stacks devotion on higher difficulties. But it's super duper fun. The fact that it can eliminate climate penalties is absolutely amazing. It's one of my favorite control-esque systems in the game. I would love to see something like this, not this specifically, but the idea of making control when it's really, really high gives you systems that you can activate, is very, very satisfying in my opinion. For the invocations, we'll go over this more in the live stream, but you're able to do some really, really cool stuff. Basically, it's a little tricky to actually get to use on high difficulties, because it does once again require you to have very positive modifiers to your devotion. But if you have at least 50 devotion, you could activate either one of these 4 buffs onto your army, or you can activate one of the 4 provincial buffs, which will reduce your devotion by 50, but will unleash some very, very strong powers, which is super duper duper fun. I actually love these. They're very cool. Though in my legendary campaigns I've been messing around with to just look for bugs and stuff, it has been extremely difficult to earn enough devotion to actually use them when playing on legendary. The adamins are absolutely fantastic. So you attach them to settlements, they level up, and they have a very, very cool, unique skill tree with lots of very unique skills. Their blue skill tree is completely brand new and fascinating. They have a new design. They have these like super big badass bear shields, and they're incredibly cool characters. This ability is so good. It's so good. So the Sally attack is everything I wanted it to be. You get these little zones of control around the settlement that the admin is actually in, and basically when you select the admin, he can lead the garrison out to attack the enemy army, and it's perfect because it'll just grab the enemy. So the enemy, from my testing, the enemy cannot run away. You just get them. It's not an ambush, it's a regular battle, but you just grab them. But that means you can literally move one of your other armies in reinforcement range and then attack with the admin, and both armies will engage. And it's so satisfying. Like, it is it is very difficult for the AI to mess around your major settlements without getting caught, which is a very good, nice feeling, and I love it. Mother Ostankya's teleport dilemma. This one, I think they did the best case scenario, and it worked out really, really well. You get a dilemma very, very quickly. I think it's when you capture like the first province or something. But you have two options. You can either remain in Nagaroth, where you gain 20 Spirit Essence for free. You also unlock the Witch's Hut mechanic if you haven't already, and you get 2 random trinkets unlocked as well. So normally her trinkets are you have to defeat every different army in the game, and once you've defeated a certain army and unlocks a trinket that you can then use to make curses. Well, now they've made it where if you remain in Nagaroth, you get 2 of them for 2 random ones for free. So you might get lucky and get one of the factions that is like really far away from where you currently are, like Cathay or something. Though I guess Cathay's not that far away with Zhaoming or Yuan Bo, but you get the point. Alternatively, you can leave for Kislev. If you leave for Kislev, you get a unique buff called the Daughter's Return, which gives you some solid buffs for 10 turns. You get access to the full Kislevite building chain instead of the more locked one that Ostankya has over in Nagaroth. So it kind of makes her a more standard Kislev campaign. And she also immediately takes over Plesk. So Plesk is the cool settlement for her because it has her unique landmark building that's in Kislev, which is the Ancient Widow's Tree. And that gives some really fun, powerful buffs. And then in addition to that, her hut also has an alternative location. So if you're playing with Mother Ostankya, you can build her hut in either Nagaroth or you can build it in Kislev. If you build in Kislev, you'll find it in the city of Prague. You find it in Volksgrad. So it's in Volksgrad. But you can only have one of them active at a time. So if you build the one in Volksgrad and then you like send an army over to Bleak Fortress and take Bleak Fortress, you cannot build it again there unless you demolished the one over in Volksgrad. So they did the best of both worlds where you can play a full Mother Ostankya campaign without any problems. It's just a matter of where you choose to be. They also improved one of Mother Ostankya's hexes. They improved the one that was the worst one. It was still useful, but now it is significantly better. Which is that if you use the Empowered Purification chant, it used to just remove all corruption and make it where corruption could not increase for several turns. Now, crazily to me, it just instantly removes all plagues, which is so good. Once again, I was messing around with the Kislev campaign. I got hit with a Skaven plague while playing as Kosaltin, and that plague messed me up for a while. Getting my armies hit with a plague that basically made it where I could not casualty replenish for 5 freaking turns sucked. So I would have loved this ability to just look at the Skaven and be like, no. So yeah, this is a really powerful change. Ice Court Training. Ice Court Training is significantly better now. It's no longer randomized. It's no longer a frustrating system. It's a very straightforward system. Where training takes, I think, 5 turns. And every turn you get a dilemma. So you start it the first turn, and the next turn you get like do you want to be ice magic or storm magic or whatever it is? And then you get a set of dilemmas that allow you to pick from 4 different traits. All of the traits are quite powerful. Funny enough, my only complaint with the new traits is that there aren't as many agent exclusive options as I would like. Like, there isn't a buff that like buffs your assassination chance or your steel technology chance or stuff like that. Like, there's not really heroic action oriented ones, which I find a little disappointing because I really, really liked those traits. Instead, all of the traits are much more heavily designed for all of the mains should be in your armies. So all of the traits are fantastic for joining armies. I think most players don't tend to use like heavy agent spam. I enjoy using lots of agents, especially for like stealing technology. Yeah, so there's that. The building tree, they've also reduced the construction costs of Kislev's income buildings by half to make the Kislevite economy a bit better, especially early game, which is a good change because Kislev's economy is not necessarily one of their strong suits, at least until you manage to capture the 3 like major cities. So I think that's a good change. Also, Adamans, there's a new building that exists specifically for them, which if you build it, it makes your Adamans level up very aggressively and also has a chance to give them a very powerful, unique trait. However, if I recall correctly, I think it reduces your income by 100%, so it's kind of a use with caution building or building it in a province that you're not really using for economic benefits, where you could just kind of train up your new Adamans. This one's pretty fun. They've renamed all of the Kislev landmarks that have numbered upgrades. So basically, instead of it being like the Magnus Gardens 1, the Magnus Gardens 2, and the Magnus Gardens 3, now it's each level has a unique name that kind of adds a little more loreful funness. The Boca Palace has a 5th tier now. The Imperial Landmark, Imperial Embassy is now notably better than it was. And also there is a new tree where there's an Orthodoxy building tree and an Ice Court building tree. And if you build it in a normal settlement, it'll look like this, where there's 3 tiers. This one focuses more on Orthodoxy support, devotion, and corruption mitigation, I think. And then the Ice Court building, if memory serves, I believe is more about tech buffs, buffing your ice switches and like magic stuff. Though I think it also gives some devotion. However, if you build either of these, and you can see they have like a split. However, if you build them in key Kislevite cities, which I think is just the 3 big ones, so like Prague, Kislev, and Erengrad, I think it's just those 3, you get a unique version where not only does it go up to tier 4, but the tier 3 also has more optional splits. I'm pretty sure it's just in those 3 settlements, but I'd have to double check. But yeah, so Kislev is just way more interesting. So many more choices, just vast improvements. The tech tree is so much better. It is vastly better. Mother Ostankya's tree is been added to the land tab. So essentially the land tab has 1 section unless you're playing as Mother Ostankya, and then it has 2 sections. The people tree has 2 sections, and then the state tree has 3 sections. So you have 1 section, 2 section, 3 section, unless you're a Mother Ostankya, and then it goes 2, 2, 3. For skill trees, yep, they've revamped a lot of the unique skills. The Boyars also have a new unique skill tree, which allows them to customize more into what kind of general you want them to be. And Adamans have a completely unique skill tree. Kislev, there's also like just some notable little changes where they've buffed some stuff and reorder some things when it comes to Boris. For Kislev, one thing they've done for Zhao Ming is Zhao Ming has some pretty massive buffs when it comes to Ogre Mercenaries, but he used to not really have easy access to Ogre Mercenaries. Now he does. So when you're playing as a Zhao Ming campaign, you start with an Ogre camp right next to you, which means you can immediately open the door by hiring some Ogres, and Zhao Ming's Ogres get genuinely terrifying. So it's a really solid go for him, because he buffs like their melee attack, their melee defense, and I think their upkeep reduction. So he makes mercenaries quite spooky. And then Miao Ying, they tweaked her lord and faction buffs a good bit. So she gets more buffs for Nangao units, which are the Nangao Grenadiers, the shotgun infantry that I can't remember, the Iron Hail Gunners, and then the Crane Gunners. So those 3 units she gives a lot of really powerful buffs to. And she also has more faction buffs that have to do with the Great Bastion. So if I recall correctly, her Great Bash is like all the construction cost is like 40% cheaper or something crazy like that. This is a huge, lovely change. The UI is no longer garbage when it comes to abilities. Thank goodness that they did this. Also, all the mod shoutouts, a lot of fantastic modders' work inspired a lot of these changes, which is great and fantastic. And those modders should be super duper proud. This is one of those ones that, like, I don't know how we didn't have this sooner, but now you can actually see all of your abilities instead of them overlapping and being impossible to navigate. In battle, they've made some notable little changes and information tweaks to how horse cavalry works, as far as like how they turn and pivot. So basically what they've done is that high elf and Bretonnian cavalry are now significantly better at like turning and adjusting like their angle and pivoting on the spot and all that stuff compared to all other cavalry. And then undead skeletal steeds are a little worse than everybody else at it, which I think is fine and flavorful and cool. We'll also, of course, look at this one here in just a moment. Bug fixes, a lot of bug fixes and just general campaign tweaks all across the campaign. I'm not gonna go over all of these because, you know, you are an adult and you can read them on your own. But there's a lot of like really, really solid fixes. You can just see just a ton of bug fixes. Some various audio fixes, miscellaneous fixes, blood pack fixes, lots of little stuff. The known issues that they're aware of, but haven't had a chance to quite fix yet, is that there are some instances where devotion still shows up as control due to just like slight tech stuff. There is a couple little things to watch out for with like admins. So like don't abandon or sell a settlement if it has an admin in it. Move the admin first or else it'll kill them. The quest battle for Kairos is a little messed up. So just little things that will, you know, get fixed probably in a 6.11 hotfix. But yeah, excellent. I'm very, very, very excited to dive into the campaign. Doing this video is almost torturous because I want to go get into the campaign stuff. Yeah, excellent changes. So from there, let's go ahead and hop into the more multiplayer focused change. Well, they're not multiplayer focused, but the like stat changes and things, which do tend to more heavily affect multiplayer, but not always. So let's just blitz through these real fast so I can get to my gosh darn live stream. So first, we got the Beastmen. Tarux is cheaper. Malagor can no longer hide in the forest, which makes sense. He's a flying unit. Really shouldn't be doing that anyway. Centaurs of Tzeentch are now more expensive in multiplayer. Zongors, Pestigors, and Korngors all got a little debuffed, which is fair because they were all pretty heavily overperforming. So Zongors were made a little less aggressive with lower charge bonus. Same thing for Pestigors. Korngors got slapped a little harder with a reduced charge bonus. They also lost a little bit of damage, just a little though. Regular Centaurs are more expensive, but only in multiplayer, which is fair because they were grossly overperforming. Goreherds got a little higher charge bonus. They were made a little more aggressive compared to their monogod adjacent friends, but they also gained a slight price increase. We see Goreherds with shields are a little better, a little more aggressive in the RORs as well. Bretonnia, Knights Errant got some pretty nice buffs, +5 charge bonus, +2 melee attack, so much more deadly on the charge, and also just more consistently able to deal out damage. Here's a change I'm particularly excited about, which is that Pegasi, universally across the entire game, got heavier. So Pegasi have a bit higher mass, which is great. I've always been a little frustrated that Total War Warhammer treats Pegasi like regular horses when they should be monstrous cavalry. If you actually look at how large a Pegasus is in the Warhammer Fantasy world compared to a horse, they are huge. They are so much bigger than horses. It's like comparing a demigriff to a horse. Like they are notably larger creatures. So the higher mass is great. Allows them to have heavier charges, to also have more devastating charges, but also makes it easier for them to pull out of a bad situation or bad conflict. The Green Knight not only got a significant reduction in price, but now has perfect vigor, which is fantastic. Thanks to all of the changes they've been bringing in, we've all seen how important vigor is. So him having perfect vigor is excellent and something he should definitely have. We also see that he has a little bit more knockback on his splash attack, so he's a little better at like slamming infantry models around him or causing like staggers and stuff to large groups of enemies. Grill Guardians, we see that their max entities hit by splash has been reduced, but the splash attack force multiplier has gone up, so they're a little better at knocking people around, but their attacks are also more concentrated. Generally speaking, having lower max entities hit by splash tends to be good because it means your damage is less divided among enemy models, so your attacks are more likely to kill an enemy model as opposed to just dealing lots of damage over a lot of guys but not actually getting any kills. Because it's much better to deal kills because that's going to deal more leadership damage, and that's also going to reduce the efficiency of an enemy unit because you're actually killing models, so they don't have as many models to attack back with and such. So for most units, having a fairly low max entity hit by splash is better. There are some cases where you want it to be higher. If you have like a ton of weapon damage, it's often better for it to be higher because if you overkill, well, you can only hit so many models. So if you're killing everyone you hit, but there's like leftover damage, then that leftover damage is wasted. So that's but in the case of Grill Guardians, this is definitely a good change. See, the Beast Slayers of Baston are more expensive, but they also got made much stronger. They hit way harder. So they have a higher charge bonus, higher base damage, but they got 10 more armor piercing damage, which is like, good lord. So Beast Slayers of Baston are going to be hitting way harder. Chaos Dwarfs, we see that all Bull Centaur units are cheaper in both single player and multiplayer, which is cool, great, awesome. Hobgoblins are all cheaper, Hobgoblin Cavalry, which is great, awesome, cool. Both in single player and multiplayer. We also see that a lot of the Chaos Dwarf infantry has significantly higher health now. So Blunderbuss has got another roughly 300 health. The Granite Guard got a little over 300 more health. Chaos Dwarfs got 400 more health. The Warriors, the Infernal Guard got 400 more health. So all Chaos Dwarf infantry is just significantly tankier. Way tankier. They got big health buffs. We also see that the Hobgoblin Cutthroat melee infantry also got a buff to their melee attack. Neat. Hobgoblin Sneaky Gits are also made a little more elite, more melee attack. Nice buff to their leadership, and they also have more throwing daggers than they used to. The Immortals got a pretty nice buff. They're a little more expensive, but they got notably improved melee attack. Way more melee defense. Plus 10 melee defense is massive. And they also got Unyielding Assault, which is a very, very good ability. Unyielding Assault means their melee attack cannot be reduced by any means. So they ignore fatigue, they ignore debuffs, they ignore magic. Anything that could lower their melee defense will be ignored, which is very, very good. So they will always be fully fighting fit when it comes to dealing damage. Cathay Destroyer got a much higher charge bonus, so he's going to be a lot more deadly on the charge. And the Cathay Fireboard can now hide in forests, which is kind of hilarious considering they're like fire elemental demon things. It's a little silly, but you know, it makes them much more effective and capable of doing ambush maneuvers. Dark Elves, Knights of the Ebon Claw, gigantic buff. They cause terror now. Terror-causing cavalry is incredibly good, especially on a very powerful, highly armored cavalry unit like the Knights of the Ebon Claw. This is a very rare attribute to see on high-tier cavalry because it is that freaking good. So that is fantastic for them. The Raven's Heralds have a lot more mass. Slash's Harvesters, which are the Regiment of Renowned Doomfire Warlocks, now cause fear, which is excellent. Fear is always great to have. Having that leadership penalty to nearby enemies is nothing to sneeze at. Blades of the Blood Queen have higher charge bonus melee attacks, are a little more elite. Cold One Chariots got some pretty substantial buffs. They got 6 more melee attack, 3 more melee defense, 7 more base damage, and 12 more armor piercing damage. So Cold One Chariots are much scarier in a like drawn out combat, but they also just deal way more damage. So just big buffs for them. Very nice. Harkonneth Executioners, just like the ROR version, got improved melee attack charge bonus. Dwarves, all Thunder Barges lost 10 armor. Cool, fine, whatever. The blasting charges universally have been debuffed a bit, and this is because miners with blasting charges have been pretty heavily overperforming. So their blasting charges now deal less armor piercing damage, but they didn't get it replaced with regular damage, so they just deal less damage. But I honestly think they were dealing too much damage, especially in the AP sphere. The blasting charges should be good for clearing like mass groups of enemies, but the fact that they could just walk up to like even fairly high tier armored infantry and just be like, chuck, and just blow their faces off was a little much. They are also being made more expensive as well, so you can see they're being punished for being overperformers. Gyrocopters are now more expensive in single player and multiplayer. They also have had their flyer speed reduced just a little bit, so they're easier to catch for when they're misplayed or being used for like heavy harass. The Empire, all Demigryph Knights have less max entities that they hit with splash attacks, so this is going to make them much more effective against most enemies, because they're going to be better at killing models because their damage is going to be less spread out. Like we talked about earlier, Pegasi are heavier now. The Engineer is now more expensive unless he's on a mechanical steed, in which case he's less expensive, but this only affects multiplayer. Same thing for the Master Engineer. Once again, these guys have been overperforming a little bit, so they just made them broadly more expensive to compensate for the fact that they've been very popular. Boris Todbringer, more Pegasus mount stuff. Astromancer. So the Astromancer, if he's on a Moonbird, he lost 10 leadership, but the mass of the Moonbird is now way higher. The Moonbird is now as heavy as... It's now monster heavy instead of Pegasus heavy. We also see that the Jade Longmas are essentially Pegasi, so they've gotten the same treatment. The regular Astromancer has also lost 10 leadership, so Astromancers in general got a pretty significant leadership reduction to make them less reliable, make them a little less good at just like staying in place and being unbreakable or resistant to breaking, which I think is fair because they should not be super crazy leadership heavy. The Jade Lion and Jet Lion both got some pretty significant combat buffs. However, they're not as good as they were in domination mode, so their domination capturing power has been reduced a bit. However, they got 20 more armor each, which is quite nice. Plus 5 base damage and plus 15 armor piercing damage. So significantly better damage and a good bit more armor. Especially because it didn't come with a price increase or anything. That's great for them. We also see that the Terracotta Sentinels got some pretty big buffs. They got plus 15 charge, plus 10 base damage, and plus 20 armor piercing damage. So some pretty significant juice for the Terracotta Sentinels. I don't know if that's going to make them good in the multiplayer scene, but for single player players, hey, rejoice. They're super awesome models that I think a lot of people enjoy taking, and now they're much better at dealing lots of damage, especially with those big epic charge moves. We also see that the Dune Dragon, Regiment of Renowned Celestial Dragon Guard have higher spell resistance. Neat. Gorbad Ironclaw is more expensive if he's on foot or on his mount. However, the Savage Orc Great Shaman is cheaper if he is on his Warboar or on his Wyvern. Also, the Warboar is now much heavier for the Savage Orc Great Shaman. It's got an 1800 mass, which is a ton. Tief Robber Goblin Wolf Chariot got some kind of interesting changes. So its missile damage has received some nice buffs. However, now they only shoot one shot per volley. However, it looks like overall they're going to be more accurate with their shooting and are going to have a bit better shooting at like a longer distance. So, and we see that for the regular Goblin Wolf Chariots as well. So it seemed like the old Goblin Wolf Chariots, they fired more shots, but they were less consistent and required you to be a bit closer for it to be like reasonably to really get much effectiveness out of it. It seems that they've altered them a bit, so I think this is going to result in them being a bit better at longer range, but we'll see. Ragnarok Queens are cheaper. Cool. Or the Ragnarok Queen, I should say, is now cheaper. For High Elves, some pretty interesting changes for High Elves, actually. The Shadow Walkers are significantly more elite than they were. They got plus 700 health, which is a shitload of bonus health. They also gained 5 melee defense, so the Shadow Walkers are significantly better at going into a combat and holding their own and surviving. We see that Rangers got +2 melee attack, +2 charge bonus, so they're quite a bit more reliable when it goes to throwing into melee and chopping up like other light tier units. Dragon Princes got +10 armor, which makes them a very tanky unit. That is a ton of armor. The Fireborn, though, are a little more expensive because of this. Also because, I mean, the Fireborn are ridiculously tanky. They're a very good unit. Silver Helms, +10 armor, so they're now in the whopping 100 armor sphere, which is nothing to sneeze at. We also see that the Swordmasters of Hoeth and the Phoenix Guard all got +10 armor. So Swordmasters go up into the 100 range, Phoenix Guard go up to 110, which is going to, once again, make them substantially tankier, harder to kill. The Loremaster of Hoeth also got +5 leadership to make him more sturdy and reliable, and then all Loremasters and Swordmasters now have a 30% missile block chance thanks to their swords, instead of only 20%. So much more resistant to small arms fire between the armor increase and the missile block G. Very good. Khorne, Knights of the Brazen Throne, which are the Skull Crushers ROR, have much higher mass now, jumping up to 1800. Also, we see the max entity change again, so they're better at killing individual models. We already talked about Khorne Gores. Wrathmongers were due for a debuff because they were getting banned in tournaments and all sorts of stuff. So they have 10 less armor now, so they're much easier to hurt. They also have significantly, their splash attack knockback has been cut in half, so they're much less good at like causing mass disruption. So it's easier to like hit them and stuff. They're also much slower. They got -6 run speed, and their entity mass was also reduced by 50, so their charges are a bit less devastating, and they're a little less likely to be able to just disengage at will. However, their charge speed has been increased to what their run speed used to be. So now when they're moving towards the fight, they're a lot slower, but once they get within charge range, they pick up pretty quick, and will be able to throw themselves in well. The Slaughter Brute hilariously caused terror, but somehow had a bug where it was causing terror, but it wasn't causing fear, which is goofy. That has been fixed, so it now causes fear as well as terror. Also, just like in Tabletop, it now has Frenzy, which is excellent for the Slaughter Brute, because the Slaughter Brute is unbreakable so long as your general is alive. So as long as your lord is alive on the battlefield, the Slaughter Brute has a Frenzy that cannot end, which means that it has a substantial buff to its melee attack, weapon damage, and charge, which is fantastic. Blood Crushers, we see, man, they had a max entity splash of 4? That is ridiculous. So that's come down to 2, which is much better. They also have a much higher splash attack knockback multiplier, so they're going to be way better at throwing people around, causing disruption. We see that Skull Crushers also had their max attack reduced. The Soul Grinder of Khorne got some buffs, which is, I think, good because it wasn't performing super well. So it now has +15 base damage, +35 extra armor piercing. I don't know if that's going to make it good, but it certainly won't hurt. The Skull Cannon now has a minimum range, so Skull Cannons can no longer fire point blank in close combat. They can't just like fire while they're being attacked. They actually have to have a little bit of space between them and who they're shooting at. We also see that the Hellforged Bellowers have been pretty heavily debuffed. Massive debuff. Their range has been grossly cut down. So the Hellforged Bellowers is now more of an actual shotgun machine instead of a long-range god-tier uber sniper. So it is much shorter range than your other Skull Cannons, but it does fire a lot more shots per volley, so it's got positives and negatives. But that's going to make it more fair, I think. Heralds of Khorne's Fury, which of course the Blood Crusher ROR, also got the same changes as the regular one. Kislev! Frostworms got debuffed a bit, which is good, because I should have won that game against Turn, but the Frostworms are bullshit. Just kidding. He outplayed me very well. If you watched that tournament with Turn, I think last week or the week before, where my Lizardman got whooped. But Frostworms got -10 armor to make them a little less tanky. We see that the Ice Witch version is a little more expensive in multiplayer. Boris Ursus is cheaper on all variants for multiplayer and single player. Same thing for the Boyar, cheaper on all variants. Armored Kossars also got a slight buff. They got +2 melee attack. Lizardmen, some pretty exciting changes for me personally for the Lizardmen. First off, we see that Devastating Flanker has been added to the Pokopop cohort, which is the Cold One Spear Rider. This is awesome and makes them actually have a unique gimmick besides just Vanguard deployment, which is cool, but not really enough to stand alone on. So that is a fantastic freaking change, and I love it. We also see that all Carnosaurs and Troglodons got some big health buffs. All of the Troglodons got plus 400 health, and all of the Carnosaurs got plus 400 health. So all of the Carnosaurs and Troglodons are significantly more tanky. Also, we see that the Saurus Scar Veteran on Carnosaur got plus 4 melee attack. Neat, making it a little more reliable at hitting. Chameleon Stalkers got plus 4 melee attack, which I think is good because like their main goal is supposed to be as like kind of like a guerrilla melee unit, because they have precursor shots but not like real ammo, and you can't even like properly aim them, which is annoying, but it is the way it is. So making them a bit better at melee I think is fair because they weren't that great. Also, it's not included in this part, I think it's further down, but they fixed the goddamn Troglodons. So the Pale Death in multiplayer and single player has an ability called Primeval Roar, which is super cool, and it gives like a big fat melee attack buff to all your units, but I hated it because it started with like a 60-second cooldown or some bullshit that only reduces when you're in close combat. So you had to throw your mostly shooting-oriented dinosaur into combat for like a minute to unlock the ability to give you your melee attack buff, which I've always thought is bullshit. And they have fixed that now. So now you get access to Primeval Roar if you have it right at the start of the battle. And then once you use it, you have to recharge it in melee, which is much more reasonable. So that allows the Pale Death to be an actually interesting model, because you can move it up with your army and use the Feral Roar in the like initial major engagement to get a big melee attack buff, and then while it's like shooting people, and then once it's getting low on ammo, you can throw it into combat and let it recharge. But this also will affect the Skink Oracle in single player, because the Skink Oracle gets access to Primeval Roar on his skill tree, and this will make it actually decent. Norska, the Skinwolf Werekin hero, now has Strider, which is very, very good for him. Famir Balefiend got plus 3 melee attack. Mist Stalkers, which is the ROR Famir Warriors, are now cheaper in single player and multiplayer. And Marauder Icewolf Chariots just got some really solid buffs. They are much heavier at 2,000 mass, plus 2 melee attack, plus 4 melee defense, plus 10 base damage, and plus 12 armor piercing damage. So significantly more damage, significantly better stats, and they're heavier, which for chariots is very important. Nurgle, the Angels of Decay ROR now have less max entities hit by splash attack, so they're better at killing people in combat. Pestigores we already talked about. Plague Ogres got some slight buffs, so slightly higher melee attack, melee defense, actually notably higher melee defense at plus 5. Plus 4 charge bonus, and they no longer have Wall Breaker, which makes them consistent with Ogres. Bile Trolls no longer have the poison contact effect. They now have a unique contact effect, which is Acid Vomit, which I think was always the intent with them, but that makes them like much better, because it means they're applying a unique debuff, because Nurgle has poison frickin' everywhere, so poison wasn't that good. We see Plague Drones also hit less entities, which is overall a big buff for them because it means they're better at killing models, especially with 4. 4 is very high. Great Unclean Ones now deal a good bit more damage, plus 10 base and plus 20 armor piercing, so great. Rotfly's got the same splash attack buff. Ogre Kingdoms got some pretty notable nerfs. This you would have seen coming if you've watched the multiplayer scene, because ogres were hilariously overperforming, and were just banned. They were just utterly banned. So the Pigback Riders, who were one of the big issues, have been heavily debuffed. So they have minus 10 leadership to make them much less reliable at staying power, which they should be. Like, Pigback Riders should not be good at holding the line. They should be a hit and quit it type unit. They're Noblars. They're not supposed to be super crazy reliable. They're supposed to like charge in, fight a bit, get spooked off, charge in, fight a bit, get spooked off, etc. So minus 10 leadership for them and the ROR version, minus 4 charge bonus on the Pigback Riders, but minus 20 That is so much. Minus 20 charge bonus on the Piggyback Knights, ROR. Their domination power was also heavily reduced. 5 is insane for how cheap and good they are. So it's now been reduced to 2. So they are no longer just out capturing everything. And their bonus versus large has been reduced by 3. So they still have decent bonus versus large, but it's no longer like super amazing. And we also see the Piggyback Knights lost 600 health. So pretty massive debuffs. The Thunder Tusk also got a really, really heavy debuff to its secondary missile ammo, which was the ogres riding on top, like throwing javelins or shooting crossbows at people, or harpoon launchers, I should say. So the ammo of their secondary missiles has been cut in half, so they won't be firing for near as long. The radius on it is also much less, or well, not much less, but a little less, so they're not able to harass from as far away. And also the overall damage output of the riders has been significantly reduced, because the Thunder Tusk was heavily overperforming in the damage department, so that was a needed change. We see that Scrag the Slaughterer got a slight buff, which is very cool, which is that he has Vanguard deployment, which is great for, especially if you're running a heavy Gorger build. Scrag can now deploy next to the Gorgers. Obviously, he can't stealth, so there's that issue, but he now works with a Vanguard heavy army, which gives him a very unique gimmick compared to the other Ogre Lords. And then we see that the Stonehorn is cheaper in multiplayer, or with Harpoon Launcher is cheaper in single player multiplayer. Cool. Skaven, Teethbreakers now have magical attacks, which they should have. I don't know why they didn't. Every piece of Warpstone weaponry should be magic damage. So good that they fixed that. Slanesh, another one, some debuffs that should have been seen coming if you've been watching tournaments at all, because the Seekers and Heartseekers have been just banned because they were grossly overperforming for their cost. So we see here they have a significant price increase of 100 more expensive in multiplayer, which is a lot, considering that people would just spam like 4 to 6 of these things. And they're also a little bit more expensive, a decent bit more expensive than single player as well. The Allurus and Herald of Slanesh character have way more armor, as do all of the Slanesh chariots. They have all gone up from 40 armor to 70, so nearly doubling their armor, which takes them from a very light armored unit to a medium armored unit, and makes them much more survivable against small arms fire, and makes them able to survive a bit longer when dealing with things like spears, but not halberds. And then the Eternal Entourage is cheaper. Or no, more expensive. Sorry, the Eternal Entourage is more expensive. Jesus. I got fucking jump scared by Cathay there. Casket of Souls can no longer hide in forest. That makes sense. It's an artillery piece. It's also cheaper in multiplayer. High Queen Kalita, very cool change. High Queen Kalita now has immunity to contact effects. This is excellent, and definitely should be the case. She has literal venom running through her veins. The woman does not give a damn about your poison. So High Queen Kalita is now immune to contact effects. Excellent. Grand Hierophant Kotep on a chariot is now cheaper. Cetra the Imperishable on the Chariot of the Gods has higher acceleration and deceleration, which is fantastic. That means that he is able to stop and pivot much more reliably. It also means that he's able to disengage from a combat or change direction and stuff even better than he was before, which is never a bad thing. We also see that all of his not Chariot of the God mounts has gone up in price. All of the War Sphinxes have gone up in price, but only in multiplayer. So Cetra, the Tomb King, and the Cimmerian War Sphinx have all gone up by 100. Tzeentch, we've already talked about the Beastman parts. The Herald of Tzeentch and the Iridescent Horror on all of their little, on their foot or on chariot have gone up by 15 armor. They're still very lightly armored, but that does give them a bit more survivability. They're a little less likely to kind of get insta-popped. We also see the Exalted Pink Horrors got +5 armor, which as well as the Blazing Squealers, which isn't a ton, but it does help. You know, it's a free buff. Vampire Coast. Arnis Assault Bite is cheaper. Neat. Luther Harkin on Destry Terrorgeist is much heavier, so he's able to escape from combat much easier. The Blowed Corpses now are not only significantly, a decent bit cheaper in single player and multiplayer, but now have the Expendable trait, which I have no idea why they didn't have Expendable in the first place. That should have always been the case. I don't know why I never noticed, but yeah, they should be expendable. They are literally bombs. And they no longer count towards your single entity cap in multiplayer, so you can actually take them without kneecapping yourself. Destry Terrorgeist is also much heavier, just like Harkins is. And the Damned Knights Errant for good old Solostra Dirfan have got the same buffs we talked about earlier, where they have more charge bonus and melee attack. Vampire Counts, Terrorgeist, heavier, cool. Blood Knights got +2 base damage, +2 armor piercing damage, excellent. The Corpse Cart for Helm Gorse is cheaper, nice. Black Knights are cheaper, nice. Varix Reavers are cheaper in multiplayer and single player, very nice. And the Black Coach, just like Cetra's Chariot, now has better acceleration and deceleration, which is good. That just improves its maneuverability. Warriors of Chaos. The Chaos Chariot of Slaanesh has a much higher charge bonus, +16. That is nothing to sneeze at. That thing is going to hit way harder. So way better charge bonus on those. Marauder Horsemen of Nurgle are now cheaper in single player and multiplayer, as are the Warriors of Nurgle. As is Bilious Thunderguff, the Chaos Giant ROR, so good for them. Chaos Ogres are a nice cheaper, as is the ROR variant for single player and multiplayer, very cool. Kolek Suneater got +10 leadership, making him much more sturdy and resistant to breaking, and the Forsaken of Slaanesh got a hefty charge bonus of +14, which is wild, because Forsaken are already really good, but that is a big fat charge bonus for them. Wood Elves. Lost Sylvan Knights are not only cheaper in single player and multiplayer, but got +1 melee defense. Very cool. Zotes are cheaper in single player and multiplayer, as is the ROR variant. And the Wardens of Sithral got a pretty significant buff. So the Wardens of Sithral got +4 melee attack, magical attacks, which is never a bad thing. And instead of charge defense versus large, they have expert charge defense. So they get charge defense versus all enemies, while also getting magic attacks and improved melee attack with no price increase. So just awesome, sexy buff for them. Abilities. Ash Storm is cheaper to cost. Neat. Unit abilities. Enchanted Ballistics, which buffs all of your ranged units within range, has been improved to a massive 55-meter radius instead of 35. That is huge. Mistwalker's Barrage, which is the unique passive for Eltharion the Grim, has been pretty heavily buffed. So it is no longer the weak, sad thing that it is. It's much better now. So he's going to be dealing some good damage, fighting people around him. Remoldered, which is the healing ability, I believe, for Clan Molder characters, now has 3 uses instead of 2, so they're better at healing their monsters. Primeval Roar, which I talked about earlier, no, you can actually use at the start of the battle! Ah! Fury of the Falling Blade, I don't even remember what this one is. This one, I don't remember who has this, but it got buffed. It now gets +15 to all forms of damage, which is quite nice. Moonflare, which is the active ability of the Moonbird from Grand Cathay, got +1 to all forms of damage, so it's just better at dealing damage. Epidemic Outburst and Epidemic Outbreak, which I believe come from Epidemius, now have significantly stronger vortex damage, so big buff damage. The Meat Feast ability, which I believe is one of the Ogre Kingdom army abilities, lasts 7 seconds shorter than it used to. Hawkish Precision got a pretty notable buff. It now gives you +15% additional base missile damage in addition to everything else that it did, which is excellent. From the Mist, which is the Famir passive that gives them missile resistance, instead of 20%, it's gone up to 25, so Famir are even more missile resistant. Excellent. And then items, Gitsnik, which is Grimgor's Axe, now gives an additional 50% base weapon strength, because whatever, I guess he just needed to hit harder than he already does. The Sword of Torgald on Wulfric the Wanderer got a debuff. So it does magic attacks now, which is great. That's an improvement. But instead of giving you 90% armor piercing based damage buff, it only gives 50%. But in exchange, it also gives you 50% base weapon strength, which, depending on which version of him you're running, like which mount, it might actually be better. I think if he's like on foot or on horseback. But I think it's not as good now if he's on his mammoth. Fistful of Laurels now has 2 uses, but comes with a 2-minute recharge, so that just makes it a bit better. This is an Ogre Kingdoms item memory serves. And the Fang Sword of Eltharion also got buffed, giving an additional 25% base weapon strength. So, pretty good changes overall. Overall, I'm pretty happy. They still haven't fixed one of the bugs that I personally hate, which is that the summonable skink in your Mazda Mundi campaign still doesn't have spells. I'm going to keep moaning about that. But other than that, pretty good changes. Pretty exciting changes. I'm really looking forward to seeing all these in action, especially in the multiplayer scene. Please do let me know what y'all think down below of all the different changes that are coming to the game and what your thoughts are about the patch. And of course, by the time you're going to see this video, I will be live. So thank you all so much for watching. I will talk to you soon.